The room was quiet, carrying the weight of memory as Richard Winters began to reflect on the path that had shaped his life. His voice was steady, deliberate, as he reached back to his earliest years. He had been born and raised in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, a place rooted in tradition and quiet strength. Nestled between Everett and Lancaster, it was an area defined by its people and their values. Yet even as a boy, something beyond his immediate surroundings captured his imagination: Hershey. The name lingered in his mind long before he fully understood why. One memory stood out clearly. His father had once asked him a simple question: did he have any heroes? Like most boys, Winters admired figures like Babe Ruth. But there was another name he spoke with equal certainty: Milton Hershey. It wasn't fame or wealth that drew his admiration. It was something deeper. Hershey had built a home for orphaned boys, and to a child, that gesture meant everything. Winters had quietly wondered what would happen if he ever lost his parents, and the idea that someone had created a place of safety for boys in that situation struck him profoundly. To him, that was the mark of a truly good man. As he grew older, his understanding of Hershey deepened. During the Great Depression, when jobs were scarce and uncertainty defined daily life, Hershey had shown remarkable foresight. He built the Hershey Hotel and expanded the amusement park, creating not just employment, but a sense of escape for people who needed it. Years later, when Winters was old enough to drive, those same places became part of his own life, destinations for hockey games, for laughter, for moments of freedom. Eventually, when life slowed and allowed for reflection, he found himself drawn back there. It felt natural. It felt earned. But Lancaster County itself had already shaped him in ways that would never leave him. The influence of the Pennsylvania Dutch ran deep, carried through generations, rooted in Mennonite and Amish traditions. Their values were simple but unwavering: work hard, be honest, and do your best every single day. Winters absorbed this without question. It became part of who he was. There was pride in that way of life, and also a quiet intolerance for dishonesty or shortcuts. When he later found himself in larger cities like Philadelphia or New York, he felt the difference immediately. There, he was cautious, aware that the straightforward honesty he had grown up with was not always the norm. As a young man, he never thought of himself as a leader. That idea didn't come naturally to him. What he did recognize, however, was his independence. He never felt the need to follow the crowd or conform simply for the sake of belonging. He trusted his own thinking. At the time, it didn't seem significant, but later, he would understand that this quiet self-reliance was the foundation of leadership. It wasn't until he entered the army that the idea truly took shape. Surrounded by officers and superiors, Winters began to observe closely. He watched how they carried themselves, how they made decisions, how they led, and gradually a realization formed: he could do better than some of them. It wasn't arrogance, it was clarity. Seeing others fail at responsibilities he believed he could handle was what first pushed him toward leadership. The stakes, however, became much higher when the reality of combat loomed. Training was one thing, but preparing to go into battle changed everything. If his time in the army had simply been about fulfilling an obligation and returning home, poor leadership might have been tolerable. But when lives were involved, his own and those of the men around him, it became unacceptable. That was when he knew he could not remain passive. That was when action became necessary. Leadership, he learned, revealed itself most clearly under pressure. There had been men he respected before combat, men he believed were strong, capable leaders, but Normandy changed that. Battle stripped away illusions. Under fire, under stress, men revealed who they truly were. Some faltered, some failed to carry out their responsibilities. Winters saw it firsthand, and it changed how he viewed them. Respect, once lost in those moments, did not return. In combat, there were no second chances to prove oneself. Often, there was only one. Training, he realized, could never fully prepare a man for that reality. During training, everyone believed they were doing their best. Leaders believed they were pushing hard enough. But after experiencing combat, Winters began to question that. Perhaps he had not been demanding enough. Perhaps more could have been done. Those thoughts came later, after the battles, when the cost of mistakes became clear. War reshaped his expectations entirely. In combat, priorities were absolute. The mission came first, always. Without that, nothing else mattered. Next came the men under his command. Their lives depended on his decisions, his judgment, his leadership. Only after those two responsibilities did he consider himself. Any man who reversed that order, who prioritized his own safety above the mission or his men, was not fit to lead. Winters encountered too many who failed in this regard. Over time, he learned to recognize them quickly and adjusted his expectations accordingly. After the battles, reflection brought its own challenges. The what-ifs surfaced then, not during the chaos of combat but afterward. Training replacements for fallen soldiers forced him to think differently. Now the goal was not just to fight, but to prepare others to survive, to bring them home. Looking back, he and his men recognized that they had been fortunate compared to other units that suffered heavier losses. His journey into the Army had begun simply enough. In June 1941, he graduated from Franklin and Marshall College. At the time, young men were required to complete a year of military service. Rather than wait to be drafted, Winters chose to volunteer. His reasoning was practical: fulfill the obligation, then return to civilian life and move forward. But history intervened. On December 7, 1941, the attack on Pearl Harbor changed everything. What had been a one-year commitment became an open-ended responsibility. The war was no longer distant. It was immediate. During basic training at Camp Croft, Winters encountered officers whose lack of competence reinforced his growing belief in his own potential. One moment stood out vividly: a lieutenant attempting to instruct soldiers on the M1 rifle while mistakenly demonstrating with a different weapon. It was a simple error, but to Winters it spoke volumes. He knew then that he could do better. He applied for officer candidate school and was accepted, despite competing against men with more military experience. What set him apart was his discipline. College had taught him how to study, how to prepare, how to commit fully to a task. He carried that mindset into his training, and it made the difference. From the beginning, he felt certain of his path. His diary, which he kept faithfully, reflected that confidence. Within a year, he became an officer. Within 3 years, he had risen to the position of battalion commander, leading men through some of the most significant battles of the war, including Bastogne. His rise was not accidental. It was built on consistency, doing his best every day and refusing to give in under pressure. Yet, even as he adapted to military life, one thing never changed. He never intended to stay. For Winters, the Army was not a career. It was a responsibility, a duty to be fulfilled. He never romanticized it, never allowed himself to become attached to it beyond what was necessary. Before Pearl Harbor, like many Americans, he had hoped the United States would stay out of the war. There was no desire to become involved in the conflict overseas. But after the attack, everything shifted. The sense of duty became stronger, not just for him, but for the entire country. Even then, he did not fully understand what lay ahead. Combat was an unknown. Training introduced ideas, like using a bayonet against another human being, that had never crossed his mind before. Adjusting to that reality took time. It forced him to confront things he had never imagined. Through it all, he grew, leaving home, living independently, and being surrounded by men from all walks of life accelerated his maturity. The Army exposed him to a true cross-section of society, reshaping his understanding of himself and others. He began to see where he stood, not as exceptional, but as capable. And in that realization, he became something more, not just a soldier, but a leader.